What up? How's it going? Today I'm going to show you how I built this modern slatted coffee table. So let's just get started. So I was fortunate enough to be gifted this wood. It's 150 board feet of this exotic West African hardwood called azobe or eki. It's native to Cameroon, and this stuff is dense and super stable. It's actually nicknamed ironwood. Just for comparison, walnut weighs about 38 pounds per cubic foot, and this stuff weighs 65 pounds per cubic foot. This species of wood is near impossible to get in the US, so I wanted to make the most out of every board foot. I am a huge fan of slatted furniture. When you Google slatted furniture, you always see slatted tabletops, but I actually wanted to make slatted legs for this, as that's not something I usually see. And anybody who makes modern furniture is a fan of splayed legs. So with some general design ideas like slatted and splayed, I just went out to the shop and started improvising this build. I took a quick glance at the wood and decided I wanted the table to be 55 inches long. It just felt right. So I started by cutting them to rough length on the miter saw, then I took them over to the table saw to clean up those nasty edges. Then I just laid the boards out to see what the optimal orientation for each board would be. Then I got some 80 grit sanding belts and belt sanded the smithereens out of this wood to clean it up a bit. And this will not be the last time I belt sand this tabletop. So this is a tabletop glue up. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but this wood was not as easy to work with. It's warped and chipped and unforgiving, so I had to use a bit of sloppy force to get this thing together. I used my biscuit joiner and some number 10 biscuits to help with alignment. Biscuits don't really do anything for strength, but I needed all the alignment help that I could get. Clearly I wasn't worried about glue getting everywhere, as I knew there would be a ton more belt sanding to do after it dried. Now, belt sanders are aggressive, so typically with any other wood I would just use a random orbit sander, but I wasn't really worried about sanding away too much of this material. I let that glue set up for a few hours and then took it out of the clamps. I used a chisel to get rid of some of that squeeze out and did a lot more sanding. There were a few cracks, but there's an easy way to fix this. Just fill the crack with a little bit of glue, and then while that glue is still wet, take a sander to it. That wet glue will mix with the sawdust from around it and fill the crack with dust that matches the color perfectly. Much better than wood filler. Then I took it over to the table saw and cleaned up the side edges and cut it to the exact length. This is why I left the boards a little longer to begin with. Then I just sanded through the grits up to 800 grit, and the top was done. Now let's move on to the base. Now to make a slatted base, I needed a bunch of strips. So I cut about 30 feet of these 2-inch strips, and then cut each end of those strips to about 35 degrees. I chose this angle randomly, it just looked like a good splay angle for this table. I wanted this coffee table to be 18 inches tall, so off camera I used some referential measuring to find the correct length to make a 35-degree splayed leg make an 18-inch tall table. This ended up being 21 inches for each strip. Then using that same angle on my crosscut sled, I set up a stop and just cut out a bunch of spacer pieces. Between each slot, I'll use a spacer piece at the top and the bottom. I was originally going to use 6 strips, but after taking a look at it, I decided to go with 7 for each side. Then I just sort of set out all the pieces together to get an idea of how things were looking, and I got super excited with how the design was coming to life. I then measured equally in from both sides of the bottom of the tabletop to decide how long to make the 2 stretcher pieces. Then I cut each of those stretchers to that same 35-degree angle to match the splay of the leg assemblies. With all my individual pieces cut, I gave each piece a cleanup with a sander to remove splinters and overly sharp edges. I slapped on a coat of Maker brand Simple Finish before assembly, as I knew how hard it would be to apply once I assembled everything. Now, I should probably be using some kind of tropical hardwood oil like Ipe oil for this wood, but this coffee table is not for a client, it's just for me. Honestly though, after a few months of using this coffee table, the Simple Finish has held up great. I have no complaints and I haven't had to reapply any finish. Go Maker brand. The character of wood always comes to life with a coat of oil, and this did not disappoint. The tabletop felt like glass but still had a matte finish, and I was super happy with it. The next morning, after playing with some puppies we were puppy sitting for, I got to work on the assembly. This was all pretty straightforward. I decided not to use any glue as I didn't think it needed it, and it kept assembly from being messier than it needed to be. I just used some brad nails to hold the pieces in place and then screws for each layer, and that worked great. However, with wood this dense, you absolutely need to pre-drill. Even those pre-drilling Spax screws will strip if you don't pre-drill. If you'll notice, even drilling the wood created a ton of friction and heat and started smoking after every drill. Nothing caught fire, it was actually kind of cool. I used one of the cutoffs from those strips as a spacer block to keep all my spacer pieces uniform. This worked great. I just threw on some podcasts and got cracking. I just took my time making sure I was keeping things aligned and accounting for warpage and not putting screws or nails on top of other screws or nails from the layer beneath. This wood was tough, so if a brad nail didn't penetrate all the way, I just gave it a tap with a hammer to drive it the rest of the way in. Now, I was thinking I would sand the base pieces flush after assembly, but I didn't want to apply any more finish, and honestly, everything felt flush enough. I was satisfied. At this point, the table base was looking pretty fire. So now you see me attaching the tabletop. This didn't really need glue either, as it will never undergo any lateral stress. I just used some L brackets to hold it in place from the inside of the stretchers, and they will never be seen. I laid out 6 brackets, but realized I only needed 4. You know, when there's something in your head that you want to exist, and you design it yourself and work out how to bring it to life to be functional and not fall apart, and still creatively look how you envisioned it, it's a really great feeling to see that be pulled off. Now, Simple Finish is a blend of oil and wax, but I decided to give it another coat of some citrus paste wax and use a car buffer to give it just a little bit of extra seal. I'd never used a buffer on furniture, and this was just a lot of fun. I was starting to feel that sense of pride when you want something to exist and then it finally does. So let's go see this coffee table in its new home. So I am super happy with how this coffee table turned out. Everything is as minimal as it can be while still feeling very stable. The depth of the wood color and the weight of the table make it feel super solid, and the profile still makes it feel crisp and visually light. I love slatted design, and this feels like a great use of it. Functionally, I'm not a huge fan of slats on tabletops as things tend to fall through it. You shouldn't really restrict design with shoulds, but I do prefer the slats being on the legs here. And all those imperfections in the wood are actually a nice contrast against this modern, slim design, and it gives this table some warmth and character. I love making things, and I think having coffee here every morning will make each cup just taste that much more satisfying. So if you stuck around and watched this long, thank you. I've got a bunch more cool projects coming up, like a slatted lounge chair and a spice rack, so subscribe if you want to see those. I'll leave some links to socials like my Instagram and TikTok and LinkedIn and all that, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Did I hear a drill?
Dale!
Power tools.
Dale, no power tools!
What?
No power tools! That is not your toothbrush!
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not done anyway.
We did it!
We did it!